Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again for another episode of SEO Fight Club. Let me say hello in the YouTube chat. We are monitoring YouTube chat, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them there, and we will try to get to them. And today's topic, accidentally skipped ahead. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about a video that Google put out about the meta keywords tag. And every few years, they come out and they like to deny that it's a factor. And it's been dead in the SEO community for a long time. So I can't imagine there's much pressure to keep up this tradition of constantly dumping on this tag is not a factor, but they still seem really invested to do this annual ritual of denying it, even though nobody's claiming it anymore. Lee, what do you think about the meta keywords tag?
Testing says it's not good, but I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah, what about you, Clint?
I mean, I like it. I like seeing it every once in a while in the core reports. I don't specifically focus on it. But when you think about SEO in the way that, you've talked about, Lee's talked about, etc., I mean, it's a zone to try, right?
Yep. So, today, though, we're going to focus not on my feelings about this tag. We're going to focus on what Google has to say about it. And I think, a lot of the SEO community, they really latch on to everything Google says. So, this might cause some conflict with some of those people's feelings about this tag, and always believing and trusting in what Google says. So it's going to be interesting. So Carolyn, before we start our show, what's happening with the podcast?
Well, yesterday I had a little bit of a run-in on a client project. And so I think I'm going to make it the topic this week, which is basically, when you have a really long sales cycle of, like 6 to 10 months, how can you judge an SEO campaign after 2? The math doesn't add up.
Yeah, case of bad client.
I'll let you be the judge. So, yeah, it's just more like, I think it'll be more cathartic for me.
Yeah, if they're so nervous that they won't sign on for 10 months and then they freak out at 2, they probably just aren't meant for being in the business they're in.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of apprehension over something that should be a half-hour consideration.
Yeah, and when it's like more of a deep corporate type thing, and the person that when they offload everything onto everybody else to work on, and then they decide to interject themselves in at a certain point, and you're like, where were you at all the meetings?
Oh, could it be a case of hired scapegoat? I'm doing this my own way until it looks like it's not going to work. Then I'm going to hire you for a month and blame you to my boss.
I don't know, but it sure pissed me off. So that's where I am.
Interesting. All right. Well, I look forward to hearing this story. So be sure to check out Carolyn's podcast. It's on every platform out there. So if you have a favorite podcast platform, it's there. If you want to find it, there's the bit.ly URL. You can also Google it by name. Carolyn is an excellent SEO, and she ranks #1 for her brand. So, check it out. Consume it. I love this thing. I binged listened to the whole 2 seasons so far. So get caught up on it. It's pretty cool. And they're short and sweet episodes. They're all like 10 to 15 minutes each. So it's not a big commitment, but it's really cool stories about SEO. So check it out. And then that brings us to SEO this week. So Clint, what is going on with the YouTube show?
I'm just really, really crazy busy right now. So that one's put on the it gets shoved to the side pretty easily. So I don't know when it's coming back. It's coming back. I just don't know when.
All right. Well, we'll keep pestering you about it because we think it should continue to exist. And so I'm taking it based on the fact that you got too busy that the news side also got derailed. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part.
It's so hard to do an SEO news site daily. Like you have to have help, or you just have to be Barry Schwartz.
Yeah, even with the research stuff, right? So the research and then deciding what news. And I always kind of busted Barry's balls for creating news out of forum posts and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you see why he does it, because there's really not a whole lot to write about if you don't make some stuff up.
Yeah, I gave him a lot of grief over using the Google Doodle as SEO news. I'm glad he stopped that. But yeah, you have to give him credit. It's a monumental effort to do daily news on something. And so kudos to him for keeping up with it for so long. But yeah, we got to get you back on track somehow. And maybe that means you need to get some help in writing the posts.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, keep us informed. We want it to live. All right. So Google released a 2-minute video just to say that meta keywords is not a factor. And this video was fascinating to me. And most SEOs in our industry, this is the sentiment that they have, laugh out loud, people who use meta keywords are stupid. So if you go to Signals Lab and you ask about meta keywords, expect to get griefed hard. So that's just, that's the climate we're in right now. And so, I don't like to have strong opinions about what is or isn't a factor. I'm a tester, so I see a video like this, and I kind of want to look for two things. I want to look for any confirmations of things I've already tested, and I want to look for any new claims that are testable. And I don't care if meta keywords is or isn't a factor. I just want to know the fact of the matter. I'm not emotionally invested in it. Like, I'm not going to get all mad if it ends up being a factor or if it ends up not being a factor. Like, I don't feel dumb either. Like, if I used to use meta keywords and now I don't feel any shame about it. It's just the world changed. So I don't see why people grief on it so heavily when there's no reason to be emotionally attached to it. It's like either it works or it doesn't, so let's just figure that out.
Ted, quick question on this. The video, was there any context given for it, or did it just literally come out of nowhere?
Yeah, it seems odd that they would even do the video.
Yeah,
I mean, and there's not I can't imagine there's a whole lot of people going, hey, Google, can I use meta keywords anymore?
Yeah, it's like every 2 years or so they have to come out and make big claims on this, and it's not like the industry is pushing this as a factor. So I don't know why they keep up this ritual of denying this anymore. I think they won the denial war. And so, yeah, it's weird that it came out yet again. But here's the URL. So if you are watching this not live in the not too distant future, this is where you would pause the video and go watch this 2-minute video and then come back and resume. And it's less than 2 minutes. It's actually like 1 minute and 40 seconds. And, he's asking, is the meta keywords tag, does it matter, for Google rankings? And he says right from the beginning, just to be clear from the start, the answer is still no. All right. So we're 6 or 7 seconds into the video and you got the information. Now you just have 1.5 minutes of other words. So Lee, what do you think might be in that 1.5 minutes of other words?
The clauses where it does matter, and that's the curious thing here, because this video should have been a 6-second video. The answer is still no. Thank you very much.
What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, this is where John Mueller always gets in trouble. It's always no, but, and then everyone hangs on to that but part quick.
Yeah, to be fair, he didn't put in the but. I added that. He unequivocally says the answer is still no, but then he has another 1 minute and 30 seconds of words.
The but part. He just
So he goes on to say, we do not use the contents of the keyword meta tag. And so that's really specific language. It's no longer that the meta keyword tag isn't a ranking factor, but he needed to get more specific in the language and say, we do not use the contents of the meta keyword tag. And that language it's so interesting to me because of recent SEO testing. We know from recent testing that Google is ignoring parts of web pages. And we've done testing to figure out which parts of the HTML document they ignore and which parts they use. And we call those zones no index zones because when you put testing keywords into those areas they don't use, you can't find those keywords in search later. Like if you make them unique test keywords, if they go in the wrong zone, they're not getting indexed. And additionally, if they go in those zones, they don't contribute to keyword density. You don't get that keyword stuffing bonus that you normally get in other parts of the pages. And so we've been testing this. We know that's how it works. And here it is. He's coming out and saying, that's a zone of the page they don't use. He's confirming something we've already tested. And so right off the bat, I'm like, whoa, this video is awesome. And yeah, it's so interesting that the language switched there. But before I let you guys chime in on whether or not this is or isn't a confirmation, let's get through it all because he confirms it more than once. All right, so he goes on to say that it's totally fine and safe to use the meta keywords tag. And I agree with them here. I agree with both that it's totally fine and safe and that you probably should be using it because it's an excellent way to stay organized in your SEO. So if you can put in the meta keywords tag, the keyword that you're targeting, well, A, you're future proof if the tag ever does work as a factor again. And B, all you have to do is look at the source of your page to know your target. You don't have to commit it all to memory. And for large websites, that's really helpful. You find often in SEO that people will see that, oh, my page ranks for 500 different terms. And then they take all 500 of those terms and they put them in their rank tracker. And they do that for every page. And then very quickly, they're rank tracking, 250,000 keywords. that they accidentally rank for. And that's a monumental amount of rank tracking for things that you aren't actually working on and you accidentally ranked for. So the only reason you do that is if you're trying to get credit somehow for all your SEO accidents. I'm much more impressed when people call their shots and they say, I'm going to rank for this term, and then they go and do it. That intentional SEO, that's what SEOs ought to be doing. And so when I see SEOs using meta keywords and practicing intentional SEO, I get impressed. Like right there is a signature of somebody that knows what they're doing and they call their shots. And so intentional SEO, you know, I think it's killer. And it's, you know, the meta keywords tag, it's basically there now for people who call their shots. And I know there's going to be like a bunch of people that says, well, why would you tell your competition the keyword? If it's not obvious what you're tuning the page for, you probably aren't going to rank very well for it, especially to a seasoned SEO. They ought to be able to figure it out in seconds anyway. So you're not stealthing anything. So, you know, I don't see the hazard. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of, it's along the lines of worrying for the sake of worrying. It's another one of my favorite, kind of right in line with, it's a footprint. Is this going to create a footprint? Those two worries just kind of irk me.
Yeah, but you have Google here saying it is totally safe to use this tag. They're not punishing the tag, they're ignoring the zone. And so that's another really fascinating distinction about how they talk about this HTML tag. Now, here he goes on to say, it's usually small enough to not change the overall page size. That is so specific and so much more technical than his normal audience. Why on earth would he ever need to say that? I mean, what he's just done there is he's implicated the overall page size into the consideration of using meta keywords. That's a leak for keyword density. He's saying that usually that tag is small enough that it won't throw off that other metric that's important. That's the but. He's saying that there's a special edge case in this factor that could potentially impact your rankings, whether good or bad. He's implying that if this thing gets too big, it could cause some movement. Because why else? What other possible reason could you make this distinction? This is a contradiction to his original claim. It's the meta keywords tag is not a ranking factor unless it gets too big. Then it may help or hurt you, which is different than it won't do anything ever. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I got two thoughts on this one. If you go, you know, as they say, back in the day, in this particular zone, you might stuff, 15,000 keywords or something in there to try to rank for the universe. And if you did that level of stuffing so that the tag became very large, there's two things that Google talks about that I can see potentially it impacting. One is sort of, the core web vitals, it's your page load, to this, to that, all those sort of things in there. The other one, you're right, is we know from testing that there seems to be an absolute limit on page size that they will index. So if you got just crazy in this particular zone, you may force the content that you care about way down below the content that they're ignoring. So you kind of shoot yourself in the foot that way. I mean, that's a couple of possibilities that I would think about.
Yeah, but it's, it's just really, it's crazy to think that he says that it's absolutely not a factor, except there's this one special case exception where it might do something. And it's just fascinating that he went into that detail. Like I have no idea who he is specifically talking to on that.
Well,
Because
now I want to jump into Quora and go look at page size correlations.
yeah, because there is like nobody in the white hat SEO community that is concerned about this type of tuning. This is way too technical for that SEO 101 white hat community. It's such a technical detail that I don't think he'd normally talk at that level to that audience. So I don't know who he's talking to, and I have absolutely no idea why he needed to specify this detail in particular. And it's just so interesting that I can't help but think that it's a leak about something that he knows about that could potentially impact a ranking. So yeah, in a video where he unequivocally states twice that meta keywords is not a ranking factor, he contradicts the claim with that special case exception. All right. So he goes on a tangent here where he starts listing the meta tags that do work. All right. And he gets to a pet peeve of his, which is that the title tag is not a meta tag. And so many SEOs call it a meta title. And according to the specification, it's not a meta tag. And so he's technically right on this fact. And it's interesting in the sense where SEOs meet developers, because developers will often read the specification for the technology. And so the developers know that in the specification, the title tag is just an element. It's not a meta tag. And they just assume, all developers, when they hear this, they assume that the people saying the meta title are just ignorant of the HTML specification. They haven't read it. They just don't know. And so, I think it's okay that Google is setting this straight, because, it's important to get the technical details right. And I think the confusion stems from the title attribute, because people are like, well, what about in links when you say title equals a quoted string? How do we tell that title from this title? Well, one is a title attribute, the other is a title tag or title element. So, there's already language to tell those apart. You didn't need to make a third case called the meta title. And so, the interesting detail about this is that it also shows that John Mueller has read the HTML specification. So he's able to talk at that technical level that probably most SEOs wouldn't be able to do. So in a way, it's kind of a minor credential as to how much he's actually looked into the HTML standard. So that's an interesting tell on how he's educated himself, to what degree. And so he lists the tags that do impact search. And so, I'd like to point out that a ton of SEOs won't even populate a meta description. And here's Google saying this one can mess you up. This one affects you. So you should be, taking that one more seriously than you are, especially if you're leaving it totally blank on the page. And if you do that, I bet your search rankings bounce all over the place site-wide, because we measure that, and that's what we tend to see when you ignore that tag completely. And then, of course, the title element he lists there, also important. All right. And then he goes on to make a joke that I didn't fully get, but maybe it wasn't supposed to be like, a big joke. But he goes on to say that, referring to the meta keywords tag, that Googlebot won't even notice if you leave tasty cookies in there. And so cookies is already used in web technology as another part of the standard. So it's kind of a confusing complication of his video to misuse cookies in this way. But I think what he meant by tasty cookies is, important keywords. So Googlebot won't even notice if you leave important keywords there. And that's a second confirmation that it's a no index zone. And so I found that really interesting, that he's doubling down to not just say that it's not a ranking factor, but Googlebot will specifically ignore the content of that tag. So in this 2 minute,
hold on a second. Let's go back to that previous slide. So a bot crawling the page, my understanding, limited understanding, very limited understanding, is the bot comes in, it grabs. So what you're saying is that Googlebot doesn't grab all of the HTML, it only grabs the HTML that it will utilize.
Well, I think what happens is there's more of a process to what Google's doing. And I believe that Googlebot is grabbing everything, but then they're probably eliminating the page before they do, eliminating parts of the page before they do further processing. And so I think the no index zones of the page probably get minified out of what they actually analyze and rank. And it makes sense, because if you make that HTML content smaller, it processes faster. It takes less memory. You can do more of it in parallel. So it totally makes engineering sense that they would fetch a page and then they would minify it to the parts they're interested in, and then they'd continue indexing it. And so in a 2-minute video that most SEOs would mock, we found one leak that keyword density is a factor, 2 confirmations that no index zones and pages exist, 1 special case contradiction to the meta keyword not being a factor, 1 confirmation that meta keywords is always safe to use, 1 clarification that the title tag is not a meta tag, 2 claims that meta keywords is not a factor under any circumstances, 1 confirmation that meta description impacts search results, 1 confirmation about meta robots impacting search results, and 1 confirmation that page title impacts search results. Like, that was a 1 and 40-second video that had all of that packed in there in Google's own words. And that that boggles my mind. It really does. I mean, there's stuff we can test in there. There's things that confirm other tests we've done in there. It's just amazing. And that's why there's probably so many people that wouldn't even watch that video because it's about meta keywords. They wouldn't even touch it. And so it goes back to where we started, that SEO testers in general, we just don't care if something is or isn't a factor, but we still want to hear everything out and look at the evidence and test things. And we look for confirmations of things we've tested, and we look for new claims that we can test. And because we get good at that, we can really pull apart these types of videos really really well and efficiently. And most SEOs, the people that would say, meta keywords is stupid, they can't get past their own opinions on whether something is or isn't a factor. They get stuck there, and then time goes by and the world changes, and they still get stuck there, and they have their strong opinions about it. But if you can not be invested, then you can go in and pick things apart and find important things to test and find confirmation. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, that's a lot.
For a minute and 40 seconds, I mean, there's a ton in there.
Yeah.
What do you think, Lee?
A lot of times I see these articles or videos with John Mueller, and he will, in the context of the answer, make a distinction. And a lot of times I do find myself, all right, let's pause right here for a second and just consider what he just said and why, and how it might impact the knowledge that we have from testing, or the open questions that we have that haven't been tested. And I think that's an interesting that you found so many in such a short video. It kind of makes me want to point you at the Google video library and say, all right, we now have content for the next 20 Fight Clubs. Just go watch the videos for a few minutes and come back, and those kind of things. But I think it's important to listen with open ears. I mean, one of the things that has gotten me, it's kind of a pet peeve, if you will, currently, is I think it's Search Engine Roundtable is doing a series of articles that have a 3-step format. The first thing is, we wanted to test to see if X is a factor, and then they go say Google says X is or isn't a factor, and then our verdict is, hey, whatever Google said. I mean, that's basically the way the articles are written. There's no real data other than parroting what Google says, and we know from testing that a good chunk of the time that's not completely accurate, or sometimes not accurate at all. So I like the methodology that you've laid out here. Just listen carefully and consider what else may be going on here, or what else they may be alluding to here.
Yeah, and in the other videos that Google puts out, I mean, they're even more off the rails, like the off the record podcast ones. I mean, those tend to have so many details, insider details that, if you're an SEO tester, you become a kid in a candy store with those podcasts. So yeah, if you can suspend your disbelief and just listen to what they're saying and think about the implications of the details they're giving you, it just opens up a whole world of things. Well, why would they say that? Why would that matter? And yeah, I'm just amazed by this video. Like, I saw this video and it was 1 minute and 40 seconds, and I had to watch it like 4 times because there was so much in it. So yeah, just don't overlook stupid videos from Google, because you never know if there might be really interesting disclosures in them.
Well, even just simple, the fundamentals, So Googlebot comes and crawls your page. What is it grabbing? How's it utilizing it? Those sort of things. So here, we ignore that zone. Does that mean they don't grab it, or does that mean they grab it, take it back, like you said, and potentially it gets minified out of the code? Is there a limit on how much HTML that they'll grab? If there is, what's that limit? And if you have way too much, for example, in your meta keywords tag that they're not utilizing, are you forcing the content that you care about, out of the page that's being grabbed? I mean, there's all these sort of questions that pop up that are just come from what's Googlebot grabbing and how's it being utilized.
How do you balance, though, watching these and go and kind of interjecting your own thought into what they were saying? So they said one set of words and you turned it around and made it sound like they were saying a different set of words. How do you balance that?
Well, you got to go back and test. And with all things in SEO, I mean, you should be wary of what John Mueller says. You should be wary of what I say. You should kind of have this mentality that I'm going to prove things to myself, and you decide what's important and fundamental to your SEO and test those things. Because then you don't have to trust, then you know. And when you know, 2 or 3 things from testing, then all of a sudden you have this power tool that kind of short circuits a lot of the BS that's out there. So you test something, it works, or it doesn't work. And then you find a blog post on SEO that tells you, the opposite of what you found in testing. Do you need to read the rest of the blog post, or can you throw it out at that point? And so you can kind of short circuit all the BS that's out there. If you just learn, even like 5 or 6 fundamental things to be true about SEO, and then when people online violate those truths, how to treat their information. And it's a big deal. And testing in one form or another, it helped me climb the corporate ladder. When I was testing my SEO on the smallest store and only migrating the successes to the other 14 big stores, I shot up the corporate ladder on that. Everything I did had the Midas touch because all of my failures were in a safe place to fail and could be swept under the rug, but all of my successes got multiplied by 15x. So, if you're smart about what you're doing in SEO, sky's the limit, but it all comes from testing. And if you don't have a safe place to fail, then you're probably one of those SEOs where the next big mistake you make is going to cost you your gig. And you're probably going to learn your craft very, very slowly because you're afraid to make that mistake. And so, again, testing is your way out. Is, if you test somewhere safe and only migrate successes elsewhere, and that's an amazing design pattern for success. And I know you do that, Clint. How do you find a safe place to fail?
I've got just a whole bunch of extra domains, honestly. So,
Yeah.
So I'm in so many markets that it gives me the opportunity to test the same thing in different places and watch how things react differently compared to where you're using it, right? So ever since I was exposed to Quora, it's kind of eye-opening. Every keyword, every market has its own rules, and then every search intent has its own rules, and then it narrows down to even more that every keyword has its own rules. And when you know that, you can kind of identify things a lot faster that'll work in that niche, in that particular area or city, if you're in local, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a few comments here. We have Susie saying that is revealing in less than 2 minutes so many clues of SEO factors. Yeah, absolutely. See, is Googlebot crawling all pages in the website? That's a question. I'm not sure specifically the context of that question, but Carolyn, maybe you can give us an update on Googlebot crawling and indexing.
Yeah, I mean, they don't all crawl all of them at the same time. And they are awfully interested in sitemaps and robots text. Super interested in those.
So big clue for you there. And yeah, I haven't had any issues with updating existing pages in the index. That seems to be on track. But I know it's more hit and miss with new pages, new URLs. And we just recently had an episode where Carolyn shared her research on indexing. So there's good tips there if you're having difficulty getting indexed. There's a comment, good point, Clint, cognitive bias, good jumping off point for the testing. And yeah, ultimately these are claims being made in a video. No matter how you take them, you still need to test them. You gotta prove things, right? And what's the panel's opinion on Wix versus WordPress? At the end of the day, it all has to be HTML, because that's how Google's system works. And even when Google deals with non-HTML documents in search, like Word documents and PDFs and text files and RTF files and all of those things, the way Google's handling them is they have converters that convert those other formats into HTML, and then they get processed as normal through the same workflow. And so at the end of the day, it's all HTML, and then it all gets processed as HTML. So the main considerations on those platforms is, can you edit the parts of the page you need to edit? And so when you go to Shopify or these WYSIWYG website builders, they may not give you the same degree of access to alter what would be the HTML. And then beyond that, there's a content management side. And does that content management system work well with your workflows and your team? It's probably those considerations on the workflows are probably the most important ones over time, because that personnel time is money. So on a Wix versus WordPress, I'd say, which one is your content team more comfortable with, more efficient with working? Because if they're better at one than the other, then over the course of 5 years, that efficiency is going to save you time and money. Let's see. Someone says, by the way, if Carolyn is looking for additional datum, I implemented her process for indexing on a relatively new page, and it worked like a charm. Index resistant posts were up there in about 8 days. So good feedback. People, yeah, a number of people have been saying that it's been working.
Thank you.
Just to keep her humble, I submitted a whole bunch of pages and I got about 20% indexing rate with that. So there's your kick of humility there, Carolyn.
Well, I'd have to see your process.
And there you go. So you got one good review and one mediocre review. I'd call it mediocre because 20% is still better than zero.
Exactly.
And how many pages was in that 20%? Was it like
12?
12?
Yeah.
So yeah, the episode, Carolyn, you mentioned that you were indexing like what, 100, 200?
Oh, that's the daily quota.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's the limit of how much you could do using that method.
Right. So
Okay.
for normal people, it's enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely hear like people who are wanting to do more griping a little bit because it's not, 100% at, 20,000 pages.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
yeah, I hear you, Lee. But it's kind of like there is a way in and you just have to fit through the door. So
Well, it's another thing you can try, and some people are having success with it.
Carolyn just publicly said that I was fat. That's
I did not.
I heard that it was a cat door.
Still too fat for it. Thanks, Carolyn. Appreciate that.
Always available, Lee. Thanks.
And the last question we had was, don't they say things not to do because they work? There is kind of that pattern, but I don't think that was their intent in this particular case. I think they were being honest that Google will ignore the meta keywords tag. It's just they said so many darn interesting things around that comment that it's just remarkable. So yeah, there is that nature of Google to tell you not to do things that work. But I don't think that's what they did this time. I do believe that the meta keywords tag right now in the current climate won't get you very far, but I think there's new edge cases we need to test about it. And with that, I will end the show. So thank you, everyone. And, be sure to come back next